Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Reaction Show. My name is Andrew Velez. I'm here with my co-host, Mr. Joel Dells. We are here after a shockingly great Thursday night football game. I say shockingly because you know the laundry list of games that we've had on Thursday nights where the games have not been so good. But we are here after the Dallas Cowboys just beat the Seattle Seahawks. Before we get into that game, Mr. Dells, how are you doing tonight, sir?
Doing fantastic. It's really nice to see great Thursday night football games. I hope next year, it won't happen, but I hope one day that the NFL should, if you're on a bye, the next week is Thursday night football. Now, the first 3 weeks of the season, the last month of the season, not be able to do it because byes run from week 4 to 14 or whatever. But there's such a difference when you have a full week of rest compared to, 3-4 days of rest. So I hope the NFL looks into this because this was really one of the best games of the season. And I don't think anyone was expecting that. We were talking on the Patreon yesterday saying, will Dallas be able to cover 9.5 points? I think all of us said, yeah, when Dallas plays these kind of middling opponents or below average teams, I would have probably Seattle as an average team. They usually smoke them, but we saw that Seattle was there, swing after swing offensively. At least that defense needs a lot of work, but offensively, this was probably Geno Smith's best game of his season. And even these last 2 years, it's probably one of the best games of his Seattle career. He was dotting up all over the field against the Cowboys defense, who has been on top of the world for, a majority of the season. It was a fantastic game. But I think the people need an update on we're in the playoffs now. We were off last week because of Thanksgiving, but give the people an update of our main league, our big money league, how you stand in the playoffs.
So far, so damn good. Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb. I mean, it's an absolute blessing to have these two gentlemen on my roster. I mean, week in, week out, they make me feel like I'm the luckiest guy, smartest guy on planet Earth because I saw the vision. I knew what was going on. CD obviously did it last year, so I fully anticipated that he could do it this year. Dak Prescott had a little bit of a down year. I kind of had an inclination that he would get back to playing the level of football that we saw when he threw 37 touchdowns. I was not anticipating that he would have his best year by far. This has been outstanding football from Dak Prescott, but the team's sitting pretty right now. We went into this week. We do 2-week playoffs. So we went into this week with a 60-point lead, and right now we are up almost 90 points. Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb. I mean, the two of them just combined, it seems like every week for 60 fantasy points at least. You guys know, I'm sure you guys are tired of hearing about it. We do bonuses. So with Dak going for over, well, he just missed 300. 299. Little bittersweet there, but 3 touchdowns. CeeDee Lamb, on the other hand, going for over 100 yards. I got a bonus there. Of course, he gets into the end zone. The two of them have been a fantasy dream. For me to have them as a stack really has put me in a position that I feel very comfortable. So let me not count my chickens before they hatch. However, I will say I already feel I'm locked into going to the semifinals. Second year in a row, we're getting back there. Hopefully this year we can finish the job and potentially you and I can see each other in the Super Bowl, my friend.
We can, yeah. I'm on the other side. I'm on the other side of the bracket from Drew. But I'm even peeking ahead to your matchup against your round 2 opponent. His team just lost Jonathan Taylor. It was already a little bit weak as is. I like your chances. I mean, listen, we're not counting the chickens yet. Your opponent does have Tyreek Hill and Tua going up against Washington, so an insane game there can tie it up. But there's not much of a better feeling.
I know.
I am definitely not rooting for you. But there's not much of a better feeling being up 90 points going into that Sunday slate. So best of luck on Sunday.
I appreciate that. But let's talk about this game real quick because I feel as if I don't want to jinx anything yet. Fantasy's fantasy, anything can go any which way. That's just the reason why fantasy football is so great. But let's quickly talk about this Dallas Cowboys and Seattle Seahawks performance. An offensive game, to say the absolute least. We anticipated that Dallas would be able to score points, but Seattle, who's been struggling offensively as of late, we weren't anticipating, especially going up against this Dallas defense that has been one of the better units in football. We have seen some moments where they have gotten gashed, but it wasn't this week that I was anticipating it happening. Geno Smith goes for over 300 yards, 334, gets into the end zone 3 times passing, 1 time rushing. DK Metcalf has his breakout performance of the week. of the year, I should say, 134 yards, 3 touchdowns. He was making Deron Bland look normal. And Deron, who got his get back, thankfully for him, got his interception, but a lot of this game was Seattle kind of picking on Deron and really not respecting his defensive player of the year case so far. DK Metcalf made him look like he was regular. And that's really not something that we've seen out of Deron. And a little bit of JSN action too. JSN goes for 7 catches.
Love to see that.
Yards.
11 targets.
He's been getting incorporated into this offense a lot more as of late. So there's definitely some positives to take from Seattle, but the defense, which for a majority has been the stronger of the two, I should say a little bit more consistent as of late. The lack of pressure that Seattle's line has been getting on teams has been extremely evident, especially in this matchup where Dak Prescott was still able to dominate in the air. When they came out the gate, and CeeDee Lamb had 40 yards in the first drive, I was all right. Okay, this is around what I was expecting. They're going to get going. They're going to play at a fast pace. But then things started to settle down a little bit, but Dak got comfortable. We saw Tony Pollard have himself not an efficient game, 20 carries, 68 yards, but was able to get into the end zone. Dropped a touchdown as a touchdown catch, hit him right in the face. But overall, I liked what I saw from Dallas's offense, of course. Dak Prescott still able to execute when pressure's in his face. We saw him where the offensive line's been awesome for the Dallas Cowboys as of late. We saw him finally get some pressure, and how is he going to answer to being pressured as much? We saw him stay calm. We saw him extend plays. We saw one where he kind of put Bro to the ground, extended out, hit Tolbert on the sideline. Dak was making some special plays today, but it really goes to the question of our show. Mr. Dells, do you believe that Dak Prescott is a legitimate MVP candidate? Is he the MVP of the league?
He's in the conversation. The numbers he's putting up, especially after that 49ers loss, he statistically is probably the best quarterback in the NFL. What's funny about this conversation, and I tweeted this out, is that the Cowboys and Dolphins are basically mirrors of each other. One's in the AFC, one's in the NFC, but they both have basically the same record up to this point. They kind of have the same questions around them. And both quarterbacks, I think, statistically are in the MVP race, but people still have questions about both quarterbacks. And is this for real? Because you look at Miami, right? They start off the year super hot, but mostly beating up on some bad teams. You look at Dallas, didn't start off as hot, but now is one of the hottest teams in football. They've won, 4 or 5 games in a row at this point. And Dak Prescott is cooking. I mean, it doesn't matter the opponent. It doesn't matter what's going on around him. He's doing this with Tony Pollard really not playing up to what we were expecting, at least preseason-wise. I know for fantasy, these last couple of weeks, he's been decent, but I'm watching this game, and every time they hand the ball off, I feel like this is going to be a negative play. They were able to pass the ball with such ease every single down, first, second, third, down or distance, after Dak takes a sack, whatever the case might be. And every time they gave the ball to Tony Pollard, I'm saying you're almost giving Seattle a break because he averaged 3.4 yards per carry. And throughout the game, he really wasn't able to get anything going. Had a long of 16 yards. So take that out. You're 19 for like 40-something yards. This was not a great game for Tony Pollard. But to get back to Dak Prescott real quick, he has to be in that conversation. But I think it's unfair if we question Tua's legitimacy because of the opponents he played and not question Dak legitimacy because the opponents he played, going up against the Panthers, going up against the Seattle Seahawks defense. He's played a lot of forgiving defenses, and he's without a doubt exceeded those expectations and gone above and beyond to put himself in the MVP conversation. He should be right there. But I just want to make sure the consistency is there. I know how you feel about Tua, so I don't got to ask you. But just for everyone out there watching, I know we got a co-host on our show is pushing the Dak Prescott MVP case and is now pushing the case for that other guy in Miami. So the questions I think for both teams and both quarterbacks are still valid because Dallas has 9 wins. They still haven't beat a team over 500. Coming into this game, Seattle 6-5. So I guess you give them that one. They're 6-6 now. But Dallas still has questions when they have to go up against the best of the best. And both Dallas upcoming as well as Miami in a couple of weeks. They're going to go on a stretch of 3 or 4 games going up against top-tier opponents with the Eagles. They have the Eagles on top. They have who else? The Bills and at least one other more opponent that's going to be, on par with them talent wise.
Ironically, the Dolphins play.
There you go, Miami too. So this last month for both of these quarterbacks, Riv brought it up on Patreon yesterday. It was an excellent point that they're both in the conversation. If they both continue this play for the next month, absolutely are going to be in that top 3 kind of conversation at the end of the year.
Yeah, we're talking about Dak Prescott, who, before the stats of tonight's game, because of course we got to see how everybody plays. We're talking about a guy who before this game was number 2 in touchdowns, was top 6 in yards, has limited turnovers tremendously since early in the season, where we're really highlighting that game versus the Niners where he turned the ball over a ton, has really done a great job of not turning the ball over at all. I believe in the entire month of November, only 1 interception. He's been playing some high-level football, but like you just alluded to, it's been to teams, defenses that are not good. You mentioned all those teams. You didn't even mention the Washington Commanders, who are the worst secondary in football, and he absolutely stat-padded against them. And, hey, I'm not upset about it. As again, we're here talking about fantasy football. He's going to be one of those that I'm happy that he's going to beat up on these bad teams, because that's exactly what you should be doing when you are a high-level quarterback. When you have this offensive firepower that you do, you want to put up these statistics. So I agree. I wouldn't put him as my number 1 MVP. However, he is deserving of being in the conversation. Similarly, how I feel about Tua. But the difference here is I feel where that when Dak Prescott faced up against the Philadelphia Eagles, I think Dak rose to the occasion a little bit more so than my guy Uno over there in Miami. Dak Prescott, you could argue, outplayed Jalen Hurts. It's just Jalen Hurts, of course, was just able to make timely plays, even though in that game, it just came down to that last play where he just wasn't able to get into the end zone. I'm talking about CeeDee Lamb on that last play. And then also to Schoonmaker on the 1-yard line where he was just able to stop him short before getting into the end zone. That was a great game, just back and forth, really. But it's those moments where if you come away with the W, now that's what you have to bolster your case. Also, how can you be MVP when you're not top of your division? That's where it also becomes difficult. A lot of these conversations when it comes to MVP, whether it's fair or not, is, are you winning your division? Are you at the top of your conference, the best in the league? And all of those stand true for Mr. Jalen Hurts over there. And he's one of the league leaders in touchdowns. It's Josh Allen in total touchdowns. And then right under him is Jalen Hurts. I think Josh is a name that consistently gets left out of these discussions disrespectfully, because you see him turn the ball over a ton, but on top of it, his team hasn't been winning on a consistent basis. I think right now they are 6-6 headed into this bye week. And so when you look at that perspective, I think Josh has been playing some high-level football, is deserving of being in this conversation in his own right, but narratives don't help him out. Where you look at a Jalen Hurts, where you look at a Dak Prescott, not nearly as much as a Jalen Hurts, in my opinion, but these guys are playing winning football consistently. They have the statistics to back it up. But for Dak to support him a little bit more, he's not turning the ball over like a Jalen Hurts and a Josh Allen. But I would be remiss to ignore what he's been able to do. But I'd also be remiss if I ignored the fact that he's not doing these against high-level defenses. And even the Eagles, we know they're not that great of a secondary, that they are definitely one of those defenses that you don't worry about. When we're talking about fantasy football, a start of the week candidate was going to be Brock Purdy of the Niners going up against the Eagles, because you trust any quarterback going up against that Eagles secondary. You look at Josh Allen last week. He lit them up. I expect exactly the same thing going forward. It's not a defense you trust. But when you're going up against an elite defense like a San Francisco 49ers, you can't put up a dud like you did. People will go to the end of the season, and when they're putting in their votes for MVP, that game against the Niners will stay in voters' heads. Where you look at a Jalen in the biggest moments of the game, look at the statistics when he's losing. He is a significantly better quarterback than 99% of the league. It's just in those moments, there's very few guys that rise to the occasion like a Jalen Hurts. And in the stretch of games where he played Kansas City, he played the Bills, he played Miami, he played Dallas, you were supposed to lose one of those games and you lost 0. It only helps his MVP case, of course. But when we're talking about just this game alone, of course, you anticipated that Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, we're going to get theirs. In fantasy football, you're not upset with Tony Pollard whatsoever. He was able to get you almost 20 fantasy points, 17.3 fantasy points. If we're talking about real life, wasn't the most efficient, but he's still getting the workload that you were looking for early in the season. In the last couple of games, we've really seen Tony Pollard come on, has hit double digits in 3 straight games against Carolina, Washington, and Seattle. Seattle probably the better of the rush defenses, but again, these are matchups that you anticipate Tony to dominate, and he has these last 3 weeks. Next week has Philadelphia, a solid run defense, not a matchup that I feel like the most comfortable for Tony Pollard. However, with his work in the passing game, where we saw him go 5 targets in Carolina, 6 targets in Washington, and then 4 targets tonight, he is getting looked at in multiple aspects. And 20 carries on the ground, whether it's efficient or not, 20 carries is 20 carries, and that volume is very, very rare right now in the National Football League. But if you're a fantasy fantasy manager, you got to love what you saw tonight. And I think that when we talk about these two teams, a lot of positives can be taken away from both, but more so just the offense from both of these guys. More so surprising that Seattle was able to do this. But does it raise concerns about Dallas's defense? I don't know. I think that it's a long week. You're preparing. You expect that Geno Smith was due for a game. So was DK Metcalf. They had a great game plan. They executed at a very high level. It's just they came up short against a very good football team in the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, and this last month, once again, is going to be a big test for Dallas's defense because for fantasy, too, Dallas's defense has been top of the world. Number 1 defense, single-handedly winning you some weeks. But I know I'm going to have the question, and I'm sure other players out there who have Dallas's defense because this rest of season schedule is not pretty, right? You're going to have to go up against Philly next weekend. What you just saw from Dallas's defense against Seattle, I have the luxury, thankfully, that I picked up Houston's defense 3 weeks ahead of time. So I know at least for 1 week, I could sit them, play Houston against the Jets, and feel fine about it. But overall, you can't feel fantastic about it because Dallas up to this point, they've played number 1 bad defenses, bless you, and number 2, they've been getting so many sacks. And Deron Bland, setting the record for most pick sixes. Insane. Some of it, at least the pick sixes, are probably unsustainable. I do think the sacks, because you have Micah Parsons, you have DeMarcus Lawrence, you have some high elite level pass rushers that the sacks will be able to get there. But if they're not getting a touchdown every week from their defense, what does this become for fantasy? I think that is a big question. The other player I want to shout out here, honestly, negatively, was I'm really not moved by Zach Charbonnet. Second round pick. It was a bit of a surprising pick because they drafted Kenneth Walker the year prior in the second round. Kenneth Walker, to me, is clearly a better running back. Of course, he's hurt. He didn't play this game. We'll see if he's going to be playing next week with the long rest. But Zach Charbonnet, 19 carries for 60 yards. He did have a big catch for 40 yards at the end of the third quarter, I want to say. That is going to boost up his stat line. So he goes for about 100 total yards and a touchdown. But when I'm watching him play, I don't see much explosiveness. I don't see much quickness. His feet look slow. It just wasn't really the player I remember scouting when he was coming out of UCLA. So I was a bit disappointed by that because Zach Charbonnet had the chance these last 2 weeks to really become something special for fantasy and to show this coaching staff, too, that once Kenneth Walker is back, that I should undoubtedly have a spot in this rotation in terms of running back rotation. And he still will because they used a second round pick on him. He's not going to be phased out of the offense. But from what I've seen from Zach Charbonnet these last 2 weeks, maybe this is more of like a dynasty outlook. I don't see him becoming this kind of top 12 running back that I think a lot of people were drafting. He was probably going, late first, early second in those dynasty drafts. I'm not loving what I'm seeing from Zach Charbonnet right now. But you do have to love what you're seeing from JSN. 11 targets, led the team. He had another 40-yard catch that, in my opinion, I thought that was a touchdown. It was marginal. It did move a little bit, but I thought he had control. It was something that I want to give the benefit of the doubt to the receiver who made a great play on the ball, because if he makes that catch, we're talking about 100 yards and a touchdown and probably saying, is this the breakout game for JSN going forward? Out-targeting DK, who has a crazy game. Out-targeting Tyler Lockett, who also had a drop here, would have ended up having a solid game too. So I am liking what I'm seeing from JSN. The other rookie, Zach Charbonnet, not as high on as I was coming into the season.
JSN getting 11 targets, this is what dreams are made of, because we've known the talent that is JSN. And with those that stuck along for the ride, that you see a Puka Nacua going crazy, Jordan Addison, Tank Dell, who's been the big name. But the ones that trusted the film, the ones that understood the talent of JSN just knew it was a matter of opportunity. It was inevitable. Let's just say that that's just what it was. You knew JSN was talented, but with DK Metcalf, with Tyler Lockett, there's a lot of mouths to feed. But recently, we've been seeing JSN get his. And you're right. This was the breakout game for JSN, finally getting double-digit targets. If he has that touchdown, you're right. We're talking about the premier. This is the real discussion, talking about this Seattle offense.
Oh, God. Wi-Fi is not smacking for him right now.
Okay,
he's back.
Here we
He's
go.
back.
We've been waiting for this JSN moment, and so it was obviously nice to see him get targeted as much as he was. Now let's move on from this game, because we watched a great offensive fantasy performance from both sides, where every unit, quarterback, running back, and wide receiver, provided double-digit points on both sides of the ball. We really were blessed here. But let's go on to our starts and sits of the week of Week 13. Mr. Dells, you can start us off. Who is your quarterback start of the week?
It's going to be Trevor Lawrence going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. I really love what I've seen from Trevor these last couple weeks from a fantasy perspective. They're pushing the ball down the field, back-to-back games of an A.dot over 9. Before Week 11, he had done that just once all season long. And the production from Zay Jones might not be there for Zay Jones, that is. But for the rest of the offense, it's pretty clear that he makes a difference. We've seen Calvin Ridley get freed up. I still think they should be playing Calvin Ridley more in the slot and getting more unique ways to get him open, because he's basically exclusively playing on the outside right now. I looked at his PFF numbers in terms of snap percentages. He's playing about 7 or 8 snaps per game in the slot. I would like that to be in the 15 to 20 range, because I do think he's probably the most talented wide receiver on the team. You also have Christian Kirk, who's there, who's been about as steady as they come in terms of a wide receiver too. And Trevor, these last 2 weeks are the best. Trevor Lawrence we've seen for fantasy football. He was QB1 in Week 11 with 4 total touchdowns, 260 passing yards. Last week he was QB6 with 2 total touchdowns and 364 passing yards, going up against the Houston Texans in that big AFC South matchup. Now he's going up against Cincy, who they've been a high-level defense before in years past, but they really haven't been that same high-level defense this season. They've allowed the 12th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, but I even think that's a little bit inflated, because that's really from a lot of their early season success. If you're looking from Week 8 on, you have Brock Purdy, who had over 400 total yards, finished the game as QB11, finished the week as QB11. You have Josh Allen going for over 300 total yards and 2 touchdowns, QB4. CJ Stroud threw for 350. He finished as QB9 in the week. Lamar Jackson, 300 total yards and 2 touchdowns, QB4. And Kenny Pickett was probably the one quarterback they slowed down for fantasy last week. But we're still looking at that game saying, this was Pittsburgh's first 400-yard game in 3 years going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. So for fantasy, it's going to be like, oh, the Cincinnati did a great job. Kenny Pickett had like 10 fantasy points. But in reality, Pittsburgh's offense was able to move the ball up and down the field. It was really just in the red zone they weren't able to score. Had a job by Deontay Johnson, had some turnovers here and there. But overall, I think the Cincinnati defense is beatable. And I think Trevor Lawrence can be able to have his way with them this week.
Trevor Lawrence has been playing some of the best, or at least statistically, because if you've been watching the film, you've understood that Trevor Lawrence has been playing a lot better than what the numbers actually say. And it's just been showing on the box score that now the numbers are matching the level of play from Trevor. He's been getting a little bit of slack, I should say, about this season, because people are super infatuated with numbers. When if you're watching the game, you understand that his receivers aren't helping him out the most. Calvin Ridley was supposed to be one of those guys that was supposed to come in and really impact the game. And we're seeing Calvin Ridley impact these last 2 weeks that also go hands in hand with Zay Jones now being on the field, like you've mentioned in previous podcasts. But then Calvin Ridley in his own right, I can feel like off my mind, there's 3 moments where he had touchdowns and he just wasn't able to either get that foot in or hold on to the ball. So I love that selection going up against the Bengals, whose defense has been extremely underwhelming, and especially without Joe Burrow, it's just tough sledding for the Cincinnati Bengals. But Dels, before you talk again, fix your mic a little bit. It's peaking just a little bit. But my start of the week is going to be none other than my guy to the day I die, uno Tua Tagovailoa going to get up against the Washington Commanders. The 32nd ranked team in terms of giving up points to the fantasy quarterback. Tua Tagovailoa has been struggling last 2 of 3 weeks, I should say. Quarterback 26 last week against the New York Jets. Quarterback 12 against the Raiders. Not bad. Of course, did go for over 300 yards, but didn't look his best in that game. And then against the Kansas City Chiefs, quarterback 15. Going up against the Commanders, there's no better way to get yourself on track. And this is going to be one of those games that people are going to use against Tua. Oh, yeah, you can do this against the Commanders, but can you do this against Dallas, against the Bills, against Ravens? I anticipate that Tua will stat pad this game. No doubt about it. I'm not even going to lie to you guys, but it's one of those moments that I can see Tua Tagovailoa finishing as QB1 on the week. And this is with great performances from both Geno Smith and Prescott. When you're going up against the Commanders, you hope and pray that you have that quarterback that's going up against them because you know points.
Absolutely. So to move on to my sit, am I sounding better, by the way? I'll turn my mic down a little bit.
Excellent.
Perfect. So moving on to my sits, Jordan Love going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. You know, Love has been a fantasy darling this season, top 10 fantasy quarterback, coming off his best fantasy and probably real life game of the season against the Lions on Thanksgiving. But we're talking about Dak Prescott going up against the bad defenses. You just mentioned how Tua has been beating up on some bad defenses as well. Jordan Love's a bad defense merchant as well. I'm looking at these last 4 games that, you know, Joel's been going crazy on over the podcast. Vikings, Rams, Chargers, Lions. I'm looking at this slate of defenses, and I'm really not moved. You know, he had Pittsburgh in there as well, where it wasn't exactly his best statistical game, but overall still a better game than what he had, at least in the beginning of the season. But now he's going up against the Chiefs defense. The Chiefs haven't allowed a 300-yard passer all season. And since week 6, they've only allowed 1 game of more than 2 passing touchdowns. You know who they allowed that to, Drew?
2 passing touchdowns. Is that Mr. Hurts?
More than 2. That is Mr. Russell
Hurts.
Wilson.
Passing
touchdowns. Funny enough, though, Russell Wilson completed 12 passes that game, and 3 of them went for passing touchdowns. Just goes to show really how dominant this Chiefs defense has been, especially since week 6, but really all season long. And it stays true for fantasy, too. So, you know, they're not allowing 300-yard passers. They're not allowing a ton of passing touchdowns, and they've allowed the 5th fewest points to opposing quarterbacks. So down the stretch of the season, when we're talking about fantasy playoffs, which are probably starting next week or 2 weeks for a lot of you guys, he has the Giants coming up, the Buccaneers, the Minnesota Vikings, all games that I'm looking at Jordan Love, who has shown me up to this point for fantasy football, he's more than capable to be your starting quarterback, and definitely 2 quarterback leagues. And even in some 1 quarterback leagues, if you're, you know, either have an injury at quarterback or you have someone on bye this week or next week. But this game going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, even though they're home, they're in Lambeau, it's going to be one of the biggest Packers games, at least this season, because they're catching some fire now. Won 3 of their last 4. You know, the wild card is it's in reach at this point, because the rest of the wild card teams in the NFC are sitting around 6 wins. The Packers are in that conversation, but this Chiefs defense has been too dominant for me to start them this week.
It's funny because when we were doing our notes for the show, we have our own Google Doc, and as I'm typing in my sit of the week, I see Joel typing in the exact same name, Jordan Love versus the Kansas City Chiefs. We were on similar time, and we understand that Jordan Love has been playing some solid football, but when you're going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, a defense that has been one of the best defenses in the National Football League from week 1 to right now, week 13, I feel that Jordan Love, where I like the way that he's been trending, this isn't the matchup that I like the most by any means. My sit of the week actually is one that's going to hurt my heart to say. And I say that because I don't feel as confident as a Jordan Love sit versus Kansas City, but I will say I trust the defense that this player is going up against, and that is Sam Howell versus the Miami Dolphins. Since week 8, we're talking about the number 1 ranked defense in terms of EPA per play in the Miami Dolphins. Since Jalen Ramsey has gone and become and suited up for the Miami Dolphins have been taken to a whole other level. Now, you're going to say that they haven't played really good offenses in that stretch. If you want to say that Kansas City isn't a good offense, that's up to you. But hey, I mean, I wouldn't disagree too much. We saw them play relatively well against the Raiders, but the Raiders looked a little bit better against Kansas City than they did against Miami, where they only were able to go and put up 13 points. Raiders only scored 17 points against the Chiefs, but also allowed their first 100-yard rusher in some time in Josh Jacobs versus the Chiefs. But Sam Howell, I have to be honest here, look at these last couple of weeks, which is why I can't say I feel as confident as sitting a Jordan Love. Quarterback 10, 10, 4, 10, and 1 from week 8 to week 12. He's been a fantasy football dream. I would be dumb if I did not at least include this in my statement. But at the same time, Miami's defense has just been trending in that direction that everyone was anticipating when Jalen Ramsey was first traded to Miami. And now that we're seeing it come into fruition and it actually show in the statistics as well, Sam Howell, who's been getting sacked a ton. I feel as if Miami can get to the quarterback. Although Sam of late has been limiting the sacks, there's only so much you can do, especially talking about Miami that's one of the best at getting to the quarterback. So I fully anticipate, even with Jalen Phillips unfortunately being out for the rest of the season, that Miami can do a great job of limiting Sam.
Yeah, this doesn't feel like that, blow-up game from Sam Howell. It still feels like he kind of has a safe floor. But, those top 5 finishes that we've seen this year doesn't feel like this Miami matchup is going to be it. But moving on to running backs now, I hate to see my good brother Jonathan Taylor be out, but now it's Zach Moss time. It was Zach Moss time to start the year. He was phenomenal.
Ooh.
Start of the week, Zach Moss going up against the Tennessee Titans. First up, I hope JT gets back on the field. He was just starting to get back into that JT groove where we're looking at him saying, this is probably a top 5 running back rest of season. Unfortunately, he's going to be out for what sounds like at least 2 to 3 weeks. But just in case you forgot how dominant Zach Moss was, from weeks 2 to 5, he missed week 1. He broke his forearm, I want to say, in preseason or practice, whatever. But from weeks 2 to 5, because he missed week 1, he was running back 4. The only running backs above him were CMC, Devon Achane, and Raheem Mostert. During those weeks, these were his stats: 22 touches, 107 yards, and a touchdown. 32 touches, 145 yards, and a touchdown. 18 touches for 70 yards, kind of mid. Then 25 touches, 195 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Gracious. Today, in week 13, he's still top 10 in rushing yards, and he hasn't played more than 50% of snaps since week 5. That's is insane. The type of dominance Zach Moss was on to start off this season. And I know Tennessee's defense, their rush defense is still solid, but he proved they could beat him. In week 5, he was running back 2 on the week going up against these same Tennessee Titans. He's not just a start of the week, but he's probably someone that's going to be winning leagues. If JT is out for 3 weeks and you're talking about fantasy playoffs week 15, week 16 for Zach Moss, because I even think that first week back with Jonathan Taylor, Zach Moss is probably still going to be involved. We saw earlier in the season, even though Jonathan Taylor hadn't played at all up to that point, Zach Moss was still involved for really 2 weeks once Jonathan Taylor got back. Then he started to fully take over. So when JT is out, of course, Zach Moss is must start. He's probably in that conversation for top 5 running back on a weekly basis, because there's simply not a lot of running backs who are guaranteed to get at least 20 touches to be as efficient as him. And then when it comes to the goal line, there's no other competition there. So I love Zach Moss this week, and going forward, he's going to be someone that has to be in your lineup.
And I respect you saying all of this, especially as someone who did trade away Zach Moss in our league.
Pain me.
And I can hear that the coping in your monologue, and I respect that you are still able to put that aside and understand that he is going to give some high level production. My start of the week is going to be one of my guys, Ramondre Stevenson, who since week 6, outside of the game versus Miami, has been essentially what you were anticipating coming into the year, with double-digit points in every week outside of that game versus Miami.
God bless this man. Uh-oh. Am I going to have to carry? Please don't got to carry. At some point, I'm going to have to move on here. He's going to come back in. He might got the setup back there. He's got the Puerto Rico and whatnot, but my Wi-Fi clears. Here we go. We're back.
Can you hear me? God damn it, bro. I told you before we started the show, too. Ironically, it was just like, I've been having a good streak with my Wi-Fi recently. All has been good. And then here we are. I spoke it into existence, and now here we are with my terrible, as DB2Easy puts it, potato Wi-Fi. That's pretty accurate. But again, Ramondre Stevenson has been a model of consistency since week 6. Again, outside of that game versus Miami, who's been doing a great job of defending against the run. But going up against the Chargers, who right now rank 23rd in terms of points allowed to fantasy running backs, and with the opportunity that we're seeing Ramondre get in this offense, who else are they going to give the ball to? That game versus the Giants, he had 20 touches. He had over 20 touches, 21 carries, and then through the air, he brought in 5 more catches as well for 9 yards. But if you're in a full PPR league, that's 5 extra points right there. And we're seeing him involved in the passing game since week 6 a ton. I'm talking since week 12 on, from week 12 to week 6, five catches, 3 catches, 4 catches, 6 catches, and 5 catches. He's been a pretty strong model of consistency since week 6. He's one of those guys that I trust a lot right now in this current NFL, because with the current NFL landscape and the running back landscape, opportunity is king. And when Ramondre is actually turning it into fantasy production like he wasn't showing us early in the season, now I feel confident to fire him up as my start of the week.
And really the only other consistent player for the Patriots has been Demario Douglas, and he's dealing with concussion. So if Demario Douglas is going to be sitting, that's probably just going to be more options for what's going to be Bailey Zappi now in this offense. I just went back to see when Zappi started those 2 games last week, which were last season, week 5 when he played Detroit. Ramondre only 2 targets, but in week 6 when he played the Cleveland Browns, he did get 5 targets, 4 receptions. So we did see, even with Zappi last season, that he was able to see the check down with Ramondre. And like I mentioned, with Demario Douglas out, that's probably just going to be more options because they really don't have anyone else at running back. But moving on to my running back sit of the week, I think this is an obvious one. And if you're desperate, I get it. But Chuba Hubbard is coming off his best game of the season. And, you might see the workload he's been getting, the snap percentage he's been getting, and saying, you know what, maybe I could do worse. But going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, this is not a matchup I'm excited about. This is kind of a check your bench, check your waiver wire. Don't feel obligated to start Hubbard just because he's coming off a game where he got a touchdown, right? I'm looking at some options where, Devin Singletary, Dameon Pierce, who are going up against Denver, whose defense has improved but still beatable on the ground. Much rather start probably both of them. Of course, 2 running backs like Jalen Warren or Najee Harris going up against Arizona. They were in my consideration for sits of the week. Would much rather start both of them over Chuba Hubbard this week. He still averaged just 3.2 yards per carry last week, even though this was his best finish so far. He didn't just turn into this great running back overnight. He got a touchdown. He also got 5 receptions. But going up against Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who really year in and year out have been one of the best rushing defenses in the NFL, it's happening again this season. So I'd be sitting Hubbard. This offense as a whole is a bit of a mess. Maybe they get a bit of an uplift with Frank Reich getting fired, but I'm not going to be banking on that. So I'll be sitting Chuba Hubbard this week.
Listen, Joe, we got a comment from DB Too Easy. Starting Pirine over Hubbard. Is that how you're feeling? Is that one of those that you feel that confident?
You know what? He's been solid. He got a touchdown last week. I'm just pulling up his sleeper page now to see what these snap percentage should look like. So since the bye, 33%, 36, 27%. So the snap percentage isn't great, but in terms of fantasy finish, RB 36, RB 20, and RB 16. He's had 2 weeks of 35 receiving yards, 60 receiving yards, and this past week, 55 rushing yards and a touchdown. Going up against the Houston Texans, I wouldn't call you crazy. I'd probably be looking at Pirine over Hubbard. I know the guaranteed workload is there for Hubbard, but I just like the matchup more with Pirine.
Understandable. I'm with you there. And listen, I'm always right for my guy Samaj. I feel like one of the more underappreciated backs in the league. Even David to last year, where he was getting a lot of receiving work, and when the Broncos signed him in the offseason, that was definitely one of the moves I was more excited about, just for understanding how good of a third down back he is. And we've seen that as of late more than anything. So now moving on to my sit of the week, it's going to be Mr. Joe Mixon going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And the Jacksonville Jaguars right now are ranked 12th in terms of fewest fantasy points allowed to running backs. And Joe Mixon, a guy who is really going to be one of the few offensive weapons on the Bengals that I guess you could say is quote unquote trustworthy. But there's multiple reasons why I don't feel that great. One, Jacksonville's rush defense has been the bright spot of their defense. Number 2, the game could get ugly. And Joe Mixon kind of fades out in this game, where it is a Monday night game. You know that you'd have options on that Sunday as opposed to waiting for that Monday night game. I feel as if there might just be safer options than Joe Mixon. The opportunity is going to be there, but in a matchup where I feel as if the script's going to be them playing from behind, unless it's a matchup where he's going to be getting a lot of passing work, which is definitely a possibility, but the highest that we've seen him in terms of receptions in a game so far this season has been 5. Last week caught two grabs, wasn't for an efficient 44 yards, but 8 touches for 16 yards. When Jake Browning is your quarterback, the goal is going to be to stack the box and force Browning to beat you. Joe Mixon in this matchup is unfortunately at a strong disadvantage, and I would find other options if possible.
So moving on to wide receivers now. My wide receiver star of the week is going to be Brandon Aiyuk. There is no team in the NFL who allows more fantasy points to opposing wide receivers than the Philadelphia Eagles. Just in the last 4 weeks, Gabe Davis last week goes over 100 yards and a touchdown, let alone Stephon Diggs doing his thing, going for over 70 and a touchdown. You know you're having a tough time when Gabe Davis has his blow-up week against you, right? It only happens basically once a month. Happened this past week against Philly. 2 weeks prior, CeeDee Lamb goes for nearly 200 yards. Jahan Dotson has his 100-yard game when Jamison Crowder, who I damn near forgot was even in the league, goes for 95 yards in the same game. He is a legend, absolutely, but I didn't even know he was capable of putting up 95 yards at this point of his career. They've been beatable by every type of receiver this season. This Philadelphia Eagles secondary has been, we shout out Slay. That's our guy. He's still playing at a high level, but the rest of the guys around him just have not been able to perform. And it's kind of crazy to think that Brandon Aiyuk, actually, before I say it, take a guess. Where do you think Brandon Aiyuk ranks in terms of wide receiver targets?
Targets?
Ooh. Targets.
I'm going to assume top 20. I'm going to say 17.
He's 47th.
Oh, my Lord, have mercy.
He is 47th in targets, and he is wide receiver 12 on the year.
He's a legend.
His efficiency per target has to be through the roof. His yards per target has to be something insane. But his yards per reception, that is second in the NFL. Just a couple of weeks ago against Tampa, he had 5 catches that went for 150 yards, 30 yards per catch. He's someone that is able to win in basically every area of the field. He can win short, intermediate, deep. He's one of the best route runners in the league. He could, be a red zone threat as well. He has enough size to be able to get targets down there too. And a lot of these 49ers games, at least these last 3 weeks since the bye, they've been blowouts. These last 3 weeks have all been decided by 2 or more touchdowns, where the 49ers more or less coasted to victory in these games. They weren't exactly pressed to throw the ball. But this week going up against Philly, we know Philly's going to be able to score. That Niners defense is for real. It's been a lot improved since the bye week, but I have no doubt in my mind that Philly's going to be able to find a way. And I love all of these players. Whether it's Aiyuk, Debo, I think George Kittle's going to have a great game. Of course, Christian McCaffrey, but all of these players going up against Philly, I think are going to have great games. The one thing I will say is that it looks like it's going to be another rain game in Philadelphia. I think this would be the 3rd game in a row they're playing in the rain, or 3rd this season at least. So if it does rain, if it's a type of downpour we saw last week, I think you probably have to temper expectations then, because Josh Allen could throw through rain, sleet, snow, 20-mile-an-hour winds. I don't know if Brock Purdy exactly has that type of same arm strength to be able to do it. But regardless of that, Brandon Aiyuk, start him up.
I'm with you there. My start of the week is another guy who's been one of the better fantasy wide receivers that there are, and I'm talking about Michael Pittman, who since week 6 has had nothing short than double digits. He has been one of the more underappreciated receivers in football, and it's in due part to him playing in Indianapolis, who have been one of the more underappreciated teams in football as well, and because Gardner Minshew is his quarterback, so automatically people don't think that he's going to be productive. But again, like I mentioned, since week 6, nothing short of double digits, has scored double digits in all games but 3. He has been a model of consistency going up against the Tennessee Titans, who are one of the worst secondaries, ranked 26 in terms of points allowed to fantasy wide receivers. Why am I to anticipate that this is the week that Michael Pittman suddenly is not one of the best in the game, or at least one of the best in fantasy football, more importantly? And the last time that he met up against Tennessee, ironically, was the last time he did not have double digits. So I am here to say I anticipate that they get him that game to bounce back from that first performance, because I remember I was here last time, and when I was given my starts of the week, Michael Pittman was my start of the week going up against Tennessee. I'm here to double down second time around. Michael Pittman will be one of the best plays of the week.
I love that. Moving on to my wide receiver sit. It's going to be Drake London going up against New York Jets. I know Drake London's been your guy this season. Had some downs to start the year, but in the middle of the season, he was pretty consistent, at least double-digit fantasy points these last few weeks. He's dealt with some injuries as well, has not been the same type of player. But going up against the New York Jets, I know Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle both go for over 100, by far the best wide receiver games we've seen, at least as a duo going up against the New York Jets. But I just think they're going to make life hell for Desmond Ridder. I did pick against the Jets. I don't feel great about it, but it's just really that offense that I am grossed out by. I don't need too many advanced stats here. The Jets have allowed the fewest fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. That's including the Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle game. That's even including a game where A.J. Brown, a few weeks ago, or at least a month ago, 6 weeks ago at this point, had a great game against us too. But this defense is going to be so elite, and Drake London's not going to be the only person I'm going to tell you to sit. We'll have another Falcons player in a little bit here, but this Falcons offense, I do think we're seeing a bit of a turning from Arthur Smith. We're seeing Bijan Robinson more involved. I talked about this on the podcast last week or 2 weeks ago when we were going over the games. I do think that, he's heard some of the noise from the outside when it comes to using his best players. But this is going to be a matchup where he's going to have to pull out all the stops to be able to score on this Jets defense. We've seen them be able to get to the passer. We've seen them be able to turn over basically every quarterback they've played, not named Dak Prescott this season. So I think the Jets are going to be able to sack Desmond Ridder, make him under pressure, have some turnovers. And Drake London, who primarily is going to be playing on the outside, going up against Sauce Gardner or DJ Reed, who DJ Reed's probably coming off his worst game of the season, giving up over 80 yards against this Dolphins team. I'm not excited to start Drake London. So look at the bench, look at the waiver wire for some flexes. Maybe you have someone like, Jaden Reed is someone who's been on fire. He doesn't have a great matchup, but probably feel a bit more comfortable against Kansas City, just their offense as a whole. But I'm saying this week, I'm saying Drake London against the Jets.
Understandable. Any receiver that's going up against Sauce and DJ Reed, unless their name is Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, you probably want to stay away. Drake London, who's been having himself a solid sophomore season, obviously better connection with Desmond Ridder than a Taylor Heineke. You like Drake London going forward, but this just isn't the week to take that risk. My sit of the week is going to be someone that we spoke about on our Sunday show when it came to our studs and duds, but we were talking about him in the duds section. It's going to be Chris Godwin, who the last 4 weeks has failed to get double-digit points. The last time we saw him have double-digit points was against Buffalo on that primetime game. And it's interesting because Mike Evans has been one of those guys that have been one of the more reliable fantasy options. But then when you look at Chris Godwin, he's been extremely underwhelming. And in this matchup where he's going up against Carolina, who sneakily is one of the better teams at defending against fantasy wide receivers and fantasy quarterbacks. They rank fourth in terms of fourth fewest fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. It would be funny if, of course, Godwin chooses this week where we've seen Carolina limit a good amount of teams. Just going over a couple, we saw Chicago, who really, of course, not too crazy, but against Houston, only 16 points allowed to all of their fantasy wide receivers. Detroit, who's been awesome, 26 to all of their wide receivers. Minnesota with Jetta's 25 fantasy points allowed. They are really an underrated unit when it comes to stopping the pass. It's just that their run defense is so terrible. And of course, it just gets so out of hand that we look at the team and we understand that it's not a good football team by any means. But in this regard, they are solid at stopping the pass, and I just failed to see how Chris Godwin can get on track, especially in a matchup like this one. But let's move on to our. Oh, you're gonna give some light on Chris Godwin? Talk to me.
No, I was just gonna say I do think the Buccaneers have an interesting offseason coming up because they're kind of in the midst of a kind of rebuild, but maybe not, because they could be picking the top 10. They could go on the heater to end the season and win the division, so you don't really know where they're going. It's probably more dynasty talk, but I still want to say trust the talent of Chris Godwin. I'm with you. Don't start him this week, but this is probably going to be about the lowest value Chris Godwin has always been. I still think he's just as good as we saw him a year or two ago with Tom Brady, that he is still that type of receiver that can have top 20, top 15 type finishes, just has to be on the right offense. So maybe in those dynasty leagues, whether you're a contender or, maybe you're a year or two away going into this offseason, just remember how good Chris Godwin was with Tom Brady. Mike Evans is a free agent. They could even trade Chris Godwin. I'm sure plenty of teams that would line up for his services. So let's not forget how talented he is. But yeah, this week I would sit him.
Also, I'll say to add to that point, early in the season, we saw him be a double-digit machine in weeks 1, 2, 4, and 6, 7, and 8. All but 1 week, he had double-digit points. So we know that he has those. He has of course, the talent, the skill to be fantasy relevant. It's just as of late, he hasn't been one of the main focal points of the offense. We've seen Rachaad White be that piece that really has emerged onto the scene. We're talking about a top 6 fantasy running back right now. I don't think any of us anticipated that Rachaad White would be in that top 10 conversation. But of course, Mike Evans in his own right being a top 12 wide receiver also. It's just Chris Godwin has been the odd man out. You know he's talented. He's shown it this season. It's just these last 4 weeks it hasn't been there for Godwin.
Absolutely. So if we're moving on to tight ends here, again, tight end landscape, we know what it is. But I will say my star of the week is he popped up on the injury report, didn't practice Wednesday, but was limited today. So I think he'll play. That's going to be Trey McBride going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's not the greatest matchup in the world, but this is just someone that you have to trust the matchup, regardless of who they're going up against, regardless of whether he's banged up or not. Trey McBride has just been too good for me to put him on my bench. 3 straight games of 7 or more targets. 2 of the last 3 games, he's at 60 or more receiving yards. Kyler Murray obviously likes him. Zach Ertz also got waived. Not that he's been playing, obviously, but just even more confidence in Trey McBride that the Cardinals saying, hey, Zach Ertz, you were that guy to start the season, got banged up. McBride took over, and with all due respect, don't let the door hit you. Don't let the door hit you or the good Lord split you. So he'll move on to Baltimore, Philadelphia maybe, but Trey McBride going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm expecting another game where he's going to get 6-7 targets, probably at a minimum. We've seen his upside being that double-digit target mark, and I know Pittsburgh defense has been solid this season, but Kyler Murray can move the ball, in my opinion, against damn near anybody in this league. So start Trey McBride with some confidence.
My start of the week, unfortunately, is me putting bias aside and understanding that the Denver Broncos are not good against tight ends. Now, this guy is definitely in a situation where it's a possibility he may not play. I'm talking about Dalton Schultz. However, if he does suit up, and with the way that CJ Stroud and him have had such a connection.
We're back yet again. What's he going to say? Schultz and CJ Stroud have a connection. Here we go. Okay.
Yeah, bro, I really appreciate you holding it down because I'm really about to punch my computer. But regardless, Dalton Schultz has been awesome. And with the Denver Broncos ranking 32nd in terms of points allowed to fantasy tight ends, I do worry that, or I will say I feel confident that he can have a good game, but I do worry for the Denver Broncos that we will have difficulty stopping him. So if you have Dalton Schultz, feel confident as ever that he's going to have himself a good week. Now, we're going to move on to our sit of the week. Are we mutually agreeing we're going back to the good old days of the fantasy reaction?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I swear to God, in my Google Doc, the fantasy reaction special, Kyle Pitts, sit of the week.
Yeah. I mean, when I saw Drake London, I said, okay, I have a feeling I know where we're going with the tight end, but I'm glad that we had that moment to share. But let's move on to the Blue Tent Report. Mr. Dells, if you have the injuries, let's get to it.
Absolutely. So let's go first to the players who practiced in full on Thursday. So we should feel pretty confident they're going to be playing. Baker Mayfield with an ankle got banged up, came back last week. He'll be good to go. Cooper Kupp also got banged up. He's going to be good to go. CJ Stroud, Smitty, DeAndre Swift, David Montgomery, Rashee Rice, Kenny Pickett, Will Levis. All these guys had different ankle and foot injuries, should all be good to go. And now we have a few players who did not practice. So Demario Douglas, who I mentioned earlier, he's dealing with concussion and concussion protocol. Not a great sign that he still isn't practicing. He's probably going to be out for at least 1 week. Aaron Jones, once again, did not practice. He'll be out for at least 1 more week. It's probably going to be more than that, if I'm being honest. Keenan Allen with this quad injury. This was different because he's had a shoulder injury the last couple of weeks. And he hadn't been practiced on Wednesday, but then he would pop up Thursday as limited. He was practicing off to the side, at least that I've seen from reports. But we know Keenan Allen, he's a vet. So as long as he's limited Friday, I feel pretty confident that he'll be back. Hollywood Brown with a heel injury. He had a heel injury going into week 12, was able to play through it, had his best, at least yardage game of the season, had 96 yards last week. But it still is persisting. And the fact that he's not practicing on Thursday, it's obviously an issue. But similar to Keenan Allen, Hollywood Brown's been in this league for 5-6 years now. He's a vet. As long as he's practicing on Friday, I feel fine about that. Dallas Goedert seems at least another week away with that forearm injury. We talked about, or excuse me, no, this is Rashid Rice. Rashid Shaheed has a thigh injury, and we also have Chris Olave with that concussion. So Chris Olave was limited. Rashid Shaheed has that thigh, who is still not practicing. This is one of the reasons why I picked against the Saints this upcoming week, because they could possibly be without their top 2 receiving threats on the outside. Deontay Johnson had an illness. He'll probably be fine, but didn't practice today. As you mentioned, Dalton Schultz is also someone who might not suit up. He's dealing with a hamstring injury. And then lastly, DTR dealing with that concussion seems unlikely to play. I'm not sure. Have we heard? Is it definitely Joe Flacco? Is it going to be PJ Walker? Do we know one way or the other?
I feel like that's still up in the air, unfortunately.
Yeah. So we have a few players who are limited too. As I mentioned, Chris Olave with the concussion. At least a good sign he's limited. If he practices in full on Friday, he has a chance to get that very rare, get a concussion and play the same week or the next week, that is. Travis Etienne dealing with ribs. He should be fine. A.J. Brown, he should be fine. Trey McBride was DNP Wednesday, limited Thursday. That's a good sign that he will be playing. Joel's favorite player, Dontavian Wicks, with that knee injury. Good sign that he's limited. He was out on Thanksgiving, but now has this long rest to be able to, get back. Devontae Chan, he was limited with the knee injury too. It felt like if they were playing Sunday last week, there was probably a better chance he was playing, but on a short week, they decided to sit him out. Decent chance he plays this week against the Commanders. Tyreek Hill, Raheem Mostert, both came back to practice. They should be fine. Tank Dell was another player. Tank Dell and Noah Brown, who weren't practicing on Wednesday, back on Thursday. D'Amico Ryan said they're both going to be playing, so shouldn't have really any issues there. Breece Hall came up with a hamstring injury.
They could have sat out a week.
Just 1 week.
Just one.
Breece Hall popped up with a hamstring injury. This is important because he's still, he's a year plus removed from this ACL injury. But whenever you have these soft tissue type injuries from a player who's coming off a serious surgery, you want to be careful here. It seems like he's going to be okay, but just to pay attention to that Friday report, if he does get downgraded DNP, that is not a good sign. If he's limited once again, he should be fine. AJ Dillon with the groin. If he's not playing, if Aaron Jones isn't playing, they're going to have to go to their third string running back, who off the top of my head, I actually don't remember who it is. It's a practice squad player. It's a practice squad player who got some snaps, but I can't remember what his name is. If you could look that up. Then a couple other ones. Chris Godwin should be fine. Jerry Jeudy, Amari Cooper. T. Higgins is expected to play, dealing with that hamstring injury. So that's going to be big news for the Bengals.
All right, so the backup to the backup running back for the Packers is Patrick Taylor. Now, I looked up the situation for the Browns quarterback. Joe Flacco is named quarterback 2 behind Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who obviously is in concussion protocol. So which means if DTR is not in line or is not able to go, that means that Joe Flacco will be in line to start at quarterback. Now, last thing I'll say on the injury report, Breece Hall, my opinion on Breece. He's one of my more favorite running backs, one of my more favorite young players in the league. He's exciting. He has big play potential. But as of late, I've been kind of tempering my expectations with Breece. As you guys know, if you guys have been paying attention throughout the season, I have Breece Hall in this main league that Joel and I talk about at the beginning of shows. And this last couple of weeks, I've been feeling not so confident that I can start him in my lineup. Now, we didn't mention Jaylen Warren or Najee Harris as our start of the week because we feel like that's obvious. Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris going up against the Arizona Cardinals. It's one of the most obvious plays of the week. But I have a luxury where I have Derrick Henry going up against the Indianapolis Colts. Derrick Henry, who's been a little bit inconsistent. That's a matchup that I like more than him going up against Atlanta Falcons. I have Jaylen Warren going up against the Arizona Cardinals. And then Kyron Williams, who's coming off a 40-point banger, going up against the Cleveland Browns, who, if there's anything that they're susceptible to, it is the run. I'm leaning with Kyron. I'm going to ride the hot hand there. So it's just to be said where the talent of Breece, don't feel as if you are locked and loaded into starting him every single week. If you have other options that even if you're contemplating between, just know from one person to another who's in that same situation, it wouldn't be the worst thing to have another guy over Breece Hall at this moment in time.
I'm with you. I have Breece Hall in our dynasty league, and he's someone that I don't want to start, but I have like 2 or 3 players on bye. I have Jonathan Taylor who just got hurt, so I'm in a situation where I have to start him. But I had some running back depth on that team, and if it wasn't for injuries, I was probably going to start Brian Robinson, and not a great matchup against Miami over him, and Isaiah Pacheco, who has been solid going up against Green Bay, but we all know that Breece Hall is a more talented running back. But it's just those type of guys where they're going to be on better offenses because the Jets offense is the worst in the NFL right now. And the floor for Breece still feels safe because he's pretty heavily involved in the passing game.
Definitely.
But those big blow up games outside of him ripping a 40, 50 yard touchdown, well, listen, he's capable to do. It's hard to bank on that, week in and week out for him to just make explosive play every single week. So I'm with you. Don't feel obligated to start Breece Hall. On top of that, the hamstring injury, is it possible we see some snaps taken away, given to either Izzy or Dalvin Cook? Not the best situation for Breece.
All right, so let's recap our starts and sits of week 13. I'll start us off. My starts of the week going into week 13 at the quarterback position. I'm going with my guy Uno of the Miami Dolphins, Tua Tagovailoa, going against the worst secondary in football, probably the worst defense in football in the Washington Commanders. He could be quarterback one, and I would not be surprised. This is going to be a stat padding performance from Tua Tagovailoa. At the running back position, I'm going with Ramondre Stevenson, who's been a model of consistency since week 6. Outside of that game versus Miami, double digits in every game from week 6 to week 12, going up against the Chargers, one of the worst run defense in the league. I anticipate with the workload that he's been receiving, that he can be one of the best plays at the running back position. At the wide receiver, give me Michael Pittman going up against the Tennessee Titans, has had double digits in every game. Outside of this game, the last time he did not have double digits was ironically against the Tennessee Titans, who are one of the worst secondaries in football. Since that point, double digits from then on. I anticipate he's going to be one of the best receivers on the week. And then at the tight end position, if he is able to suit up, Dalton Schultz going up against my Denver Broncos. We rank 32nd in terms of points allowed to fantasy tight ends. And with the way CJ Stroud and him have been playing, Dalton Schultz can have himself a big week if he's able to get himself onto the football field.
My starts of the week, first up, the quarterback position. Trevor Lawrence going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. Bengals allowed the 12th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, and we've seen Trevor Lawrence these last 2 weeks, QB1 and QB6. I'm all in on Trevor Lawrence this week. Moving on to running backs. Zach Moss going up against the Tennessee Titans. It's not the best matchup in the world, but in week 5, we saw Zach Moss be the guy for the Colts going up against these Tennessee Titans, and he had himself a day. He was RB2 to finish that game. He's going to be the workhorse. He's going to be probably a top 5 finish at the running back position. Moving on to wide receiver, Brandon Aiyuk. There's no team in the NFL who allows more fantasy points to opposing wide receivers than the Philadelphia Eagles. We just saw Gabe Davis go for over 100 yards and a touchdown. If Gabe Davis is doing that, just imagine what Brandon Aiyuk will do. He might be 47th in targets for wide receivers, but he's wide receiver 12 on the year. He's a big play waiting to happen. I love him this week going up against the Eagles. And my tight end star of the week is going to be Trey McBride. Not the best matchup, and he is a bit banged up, but 3 straight games of 7 or more targets. 2 of the last 3 games, he's at 60 or more receiving yards. Don't be scared of the matchup. Start Trey McBride.
And then for our sits of the week for week 13 at the quarterback position, Sam Howell, who's been a fantasy dream. I understand that for these last few weeks, his floor has been a top 10 fantasy quarterback going up against the number 1 defense since week 8 in the Miami Dolphins. I don't love this matchup for Sam. I think that Miami can get to the quarterback a ton and make him uncomfortable like we've seen so far in this season. At the running back position, Joe Mixon going up against Jacksonville. I think game script's going to be going against the Cincinnati Bengals, and Joe Mixon will unfortunately face the most repercussions of that. Last week against Pittsburgh, had a very inefficient day, was rarely involved in the offense. Going up against Jacksonville, I think that that's going to be a dominating matchup that we don't see Joe Mixon have a good game whatsoever. At the wide position, I'm going with Chris Godwin going up against the Carolina Panthers, who very under the radar, ranked 4th in terms of fewest points allowed to wide receivers. I'm going to stay away from Chris Godwin, who has not given me double-digit points in fantasy in 4 weeks. I don't see this being a week where he
I would run back that wide receiver because you lagged at the beginning and froze.
Of course I did. All right, for wide receiver, my sit of the week is going to be Chris Godwin, who for 4 straight weeks has not given us double-digit fantasy points, and going up against the Carolina Panthers, who very sneakily have done a great job of defending wide receivers. They rank 4th in terms of 4th fewest points allowed to wide receivers in fantasy football. I'm staying away from Godwin. And then Joel's and I's sit of the week at the tight end position, the fantasy reaction special. We are sitting Kyle Pitts going up against the New York Football Jets.
My sit of the week at the quarterback position is going to be Jordan Love. I don't love against the Kansas City Chiefs. He's been a top 10 quarterback for fantasy. He's been a bad defense merchant going up against the Vikings, Rams, Chargers, and Lions. The Chiefs haven't allowed a 300-yard passer all season and have only allowed 1 game of more than 2 passing touchdowns. That came against the Broncos, where Russell Wilson only completed 12 passes. So I don't like this matchup for Jordan Love. Moving on to running backs, it's going to be Chuba Hubbard going up against Tampa Bay Buccaneers. If you're desperate, I understand, but check your bench, check the waiver wire. If you have a guy like Devin Singletary or Dameon Pierce going up against the Denver Broncos, I would much rather start them going up against Hubbard. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers rush defense is real, and I understand Hubbard had a good game, had a touchdown last week, 5 receptions. I'm not expecting that to keep going, so I'd be sitting Hubbard this upcoming week. And lastly, at the wide receiver position, we're sitting Kyle Pitts. We're also sitting Drake London going up against the New York Jets. I understand that Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle both had 100-plus yards, but with all due respect to the Atlanta Falcons, they are nowhere near the offense that the Miami Dolphins are. Jets allowed the fewest points per game to opposing fantasy wide receivers. Drake London is going to see a lot of sauce, a lot of DJ Reed. I think it's going to be an ugly game for this Falcons offense.
I'm with you. Now, before we wrap up, we got a couple super chats. Look at me remembering. Proud of me. Here we go from Pedro Infante. He says, 2 daddies. Shout out to Beach Party.
Pedro,
appreciate the love, bro. Can't Stop Laughing says, I think Seattle put a lot of teams on notice with this win, although they didn't win. If they would have, I agree. Could be a playoff first round. Definitely an opportunity there. Their defense needs to start locking up. We've really seen them regress as the season's gone on. But this offense, there were bright spots to be taken from this game, and the offense was the main event for Seattle, no doubt. He says, Ringer. Do you understand what that's about?
No clue.
All right, listen, thank you for the donation, brother. We appreciate
thank
it.
You for $2.
And Big Chief said, my Seahawks couldn't get a W tonight, but it's always a W to watch the fantasy reaction show. Appreciate you guys. Chief. But Big Chief, you don't appreciate us as much as we appreciate you. Appreciate Absolutely. The love that you showed us. But Mr. Dells, if you don't have anything else, that's going to do it from us over here at the Fantasy Reaction Show, episode 25. If you guys like what you saw, leave a like on the video. If you guys aren't already subscribed to the YouTube channel, what are you guys doing? Subscribe to the channel, turn on that notification bell so you know when we go live, like nights like tonight. We go live on Sunday and Thursday. If the Sunday night game or the Monday night game might be a little bit better, maybe we might pivot, but more than likely, it is Sunday. It is Thursday night. And again, we appreciate you guys coming to tune into us. We'll be back here on Sunday, probably going to record the Pick a Side podcast on Saturday this week, not Friday. We got something arranged on Friday. I don't know why we're not recording on Saturday. Someone was probably irresponsible. But all jokes aside, we appreciate you guys tuning in, and we